And now I want to talk about, of course, the interaction and what Denmark, I think, has done, and sometimes in partnership with us. But let's be honest, what Denmark over the last 20 years has failed to do in some cases, because we know that unfortunately this place, this base, the surrounding area is less secure than it was 30, 40 years ago because some of our allies haven't kept up. As China and Russia have taken greater and greater interest in Greenland, in this base, in the activities of the brave Americans right here, we know that too often our allies in Europe have not kept pace. They haven't kept pace with military spending, and Denmark has not kept pace in devoting the resources necessary to keep this base, to keep our troops, and in my view, to keep the people of Greenland safe from a lot of very aggressive incursions from Russia, from China, and from other nations. Now, President Trump.
This video is intended for educational and commentary purposes only. The views expressed are personal opinions based on publicly available information and do not represent legal, military, or police advice. So in January 2026, President Trump reignited one of the most controversial foreign policy debates of the modern era, the future of Greenland. What had once been dismissed by critics as an eccentric or symbolic proposal has now crystallized into a serious strategic confrontation between the United States, Denmark, and the broader European alliance system. Trump's insistence that US control of Greenland is an absolute necessity for national security makes a turning point, not merely an Arctic policy, but in how power is exercised in a multipolar world. Predictably, the loudest opposition has come from European leaders and American progressive circles, many of whom frame the issue in moral, legal, or ideological terms. Yet, beneath these objections lie a deeper discomfort: the return of unapologetic American realism, led by a president they fundamentally oppose. This video argues that while the concerns raised by critics are not frivolous, they are ultimately outweighed by the strategic, economic, and security imperatives facing the United States, and that European resistance is more performative than practical. Greenland is not merely a remote Arctic landmass. It is a geopolitical keystone. Its location astride the Gilk Gap, that is Greenland, Iceland, UK, makes it a natural choke point for naval and area movements between the Arctic and the Atlantic. During the Cold War, the United States understood this reality well, establishing what is now the Petofic Space Base to provide early warning against Soviet missile launches. What has changed is not Greenland's importance, but the stakes. The Arctic is no longer a frozen backwater. Climate change has accelerated access to shipping lanes, undersea cables, and vast mineral reserves. Greenland possesses 25 of the 34 minerals classified by the EU itself as critical raw materials, including rare earth elements essential for advanced weapon systems, electric vehicles, satellites, and semiconductors. In a world defined by technological competition, control over supply chains is power. So, from this perspective, Trump's insistence that Greenland must not fall under the influence of China or Russia is not speculative paranoia, it is strategic foresight. Critics often argue that there is no evidence of imminent Chinese or Russian military occupation of Greenland. This objection misunderstands how great power competition works. Strategic threats are not announced. They are cultivated gradually through investment, infrastructure, debt, and political leverage. China has already declared itself a near-Arctic state. Despite having no Arctic territory, it has aggressively pursued mining rights and scientific stations across the Arctic region, including past attempts to invest heavily in Greenlandic infrastructure. Russia, meanwhile, has militarized its Arctic coastline, reopened Cold War-era bases, and integrated Arctic dominance into its national security doctrine. The United States cannot afford to wait until Chinese state-owned enterprises control Greenland's rare earth mine, or until Russian intelligence assets operate freely in the region. In geopolitical terms, that will constitute a catastrophic failure of foresight. European critics bristle at Trump's invocation of doctrines like the Monroe Doctrine, dismissing them as relics of imperialism. Yet, the principle underlying the doctrine, that hostile foreign powers should not establish strategic footholds in areas vital to US security, has never been repealed. Greenland, while technically European territory, sits squarely within the US strategic hemisphere. The Arctic is now an extension of North American defense, not an abstract global commons. Missile trajectories, submarine routes, and space-based systems all intersect in this region. If the United States is responsible for defending North America, it must also control, or at least decisively influence, the terrain from which threats could emerge. So, seen through this lens, Trump's posture is not radical. It is consistent with centuries of American strategic behavior. European leaders have responded with alarm, a warning of NATO collapse, intentional law violations, and destabilization. Yet, these objections ring hollow when examined closely. First, Europe's security remains overwhelmingly dependent on American power. NATO's deterrence credibility rests not in Brussels, Paris, or Berlin, but in Washington. Denmark itself lacks the capacity to independently defend Greenland against a serious great power challenge. The idea that Europe will meaningfully confront the United States militarily over Greenland strains credulity. Second, European outrage is selective. Many of the same governments now invoking sovereignty and international norms have supported or tolerated interventions when they aligned with their ideological preferences. The moral absolutism appears conveniently activated only when Donald Trump is the actor. American progressives have framed Trump's Greenland push as reckless imperialism. They cite international law, self-determination, and dangers of militarized nationalism. These arguments deserve examination, but they also demand historical honesty. Progressives have long warned about Chinese expansionism, climate-driven Arctic conflict, and the dangers of rare earth dependency. They have applauded US pressure campaigns, sanctions, and even regime change rhetoric when pursued under democratic administrations. What has changed is not underlying policy concern, but the political identity of the decision maker. And the progressive president framed Greenland as a climate security necessity, a supply chain resilience initiative, or a humanitarian investment in Arctic communities. Much of the same coalition now protesting will likely be celebrating the move as visionary leadership. One of the strongest objections comes from Greenlandic leaders themselves, who assert their desire to remain Greenlanders, not Americans. This concern should not be dismissed lightly. Self-determination matters. However, self-determination does not exist in a vacuum. Greenland's economic dependence on Denmark, its limited defense capacity, and its vulnerability to foreign influence complicates the picture. Trump's proposal to direct payments to Greenlandic citizens, while controversial, reflects a recognition that legitimacy must be earned, not imposed. Moreover, history shows that territorial transitions, when accompanied by economic investment and security guarantees, can ultimately enhance local autonomy rather than diminish it. Despite its rhetoric, Europe has few practical tools to stop the United States if Washington chooses to escalate. Economic retaliation will harm Europe economies already struggling with energy costs and defense shortfalls. Military confrontation is unthinkable. Diplomatic isolation of the US would fracture NATO far more than any unilateral American action. In reality, European leaders understand this. Their resistance is aimed less at preventing US action and more at signaling virtue to domestic audiences, skeptical of American power and hostile to Trump personally. At the core of the controversy lies an uncomfortable truth. Much of the outrage is not about Greenland. It is about Donald Trump. Trump represents a rejection of globalist consensus and rhetorical multilateralism divorced from enforcement. His willingness to state bluntly that power matters and to act accordingly challenges a European political culture that prefers moral language over strategic responsibility. For progressives, a Trump success in Greenland will be intolerable not because it's illegal or immoral, but because it will validate a worldview they have spent years trying to discredit. The Greenland question forces a choice between sentiment and strategy. The United States faces an increasingly hostile global environment defined by great power competition, resource scarcity, and technological rivalry. In that environment, controlling or decisively securing Greenland is not aggression for its own sake. It is a defensive necessity. Europe will be wiser to set aside anti-Trump reflexes and recognize that American leadership, even when uncomfortable, remains the cornerstone of Western security. History rarely rewards those who mistake moral posturing for strategic wisdom. Trump's approach to Greenland may be blunt, it may be disruptive, but in a world returning to hard power, It may also be exactly what reality demands.